Let us continue our discussion on human health and disease, and we are studying about immunity. We have already done a video that was part A of immunity, in which we have learnt about the concepts of innate immunity and the basic concepts of acquired or adaptive immunity. Now moving further, we will start this video with the concept of active and passive immunity. So the adaptive or acquired immunity can be of two types. One would be active, the other would be passive. So this is where we pick up from the NCERT. So we are saying that the acquired immunity can be active or it can be passive. Now, what are the differences between the two? So number one, the most important difference would be that this is because of an exposure to antigen. So somebody is exposed to antigen, recognizes, the body recognizes the antigen and responds against it, say for example forms antibodies or the effector T cells. These type of things, this is called as an active immunity. So this is active immunity. Again, I am telling you, exposure to the antigen and then the body identifies and reacts and responds to the antigen. This is what happens in active immunity. On the other hand, in passive immunity, we give preformed antibodies. So this time the body is not recognizing any antigen, it is no exposure to antigen, and already the preformed antibodies are given. That is the basic difference between active and passive immunity. Now the second thing would be that because you are giving preformed antibodies in cases of passive immunity, it would be of a very rapid onset, almost instantaneous. So immediately the person is infused the antibodies and the antibodies are present in the recipient, and accordingly they can start acting against any antigen that may be present almost instantaneously. So this type of thing would have a rapid onset, but in this case the immune system will identify the antigen. Say for example, a B cell identifies the antigen, it undergoes proliferation, then some of them, if you remember, differentiate into plasma cell and then start secreting antibodies. So that is not going to be a very rapid onset immune response. It would take some time. So that means there can be a lag before this thing gets its onset. I hope the second point is now absolutely clear. The third thing is that this would be of a very short duration. So this would be of short duration. The simple reason is that you have given preformed antibodies and they will have a particular half-life, and because the body is not making antibodies, so once these infused antibodies are finished, then the immunity is gone. So that means it is for a shorter duration. But here, because the immune system has been sensitized and it keeps on producing antibodies, it also makes memory, if you remember. So therefore this would be of longer duration. So this would be of longer duration. Now, final thing to understand would be that if there is an urgency, then you should go for passive immunization. So a question in the examination can be asked, you can be given a particular condition and you will be asked that what do you suggest, whether to go for active immunization or passive immunization. So if there is an urgency, then obviously passive immunization makes sense. So somebody has suffered from a snake bite. Already the snake venom is present in the body. It contains a lot of antigen. There is no point in giving antigen right now. Now the thing is that this antigen should be as early as possible neutralized, and therefore you give preformed antibodies which are present in the anti-venom. So this anti-venom actually contains antibodies that are present in the venom of the snake, and they are given early so that they are able to neutralize the antigen, and it may be possible to save the life of the person who may have otherwise a deadly snake bite. But here you will see that the basic thing would be preventive. So this would be a preventive type of nature, and therefore the vaccines that you got in your childhood were basically active immunization, because we know that this active immunization will be long lasting. So this is the basic concept between active and passive immunity, basic difference between active and passive immunity. Moreover, something important to understand is that both active and passive immunity can be acquired naturally or artificially. So again, looking at another important question, that if it is active immunity which requires the exposure to the antigen, the exposure to the antigen can be natural. It can be natural, which means it is because of infection. So immediately you can understand the pathogen enters the host and it is carrying the antigen naturally. The body is exposed to the antigen and it responds appropriately. This would be naturally acquired active adaptive immunity. So we are talking about the adaptive immunity, which can be active and which can be passive. So I am classifying this type of immunity as naturally acquired active adaptive immunity. Similarly, it can be artificially induced. So that means a person can be exposed to the antigen by artificial method. So that means you give a vaccine and this vaccine is actually carrying the antigen. So this vaccine is usually carrying the antigen in some form or the another. There are some diseases which are actually caused by the toxins produced by the microbes rather than the microbes themselves. There is a toxin that may be secreted, for example, in case of tetanus. So you can give a tetanus toxoid and that toxoid will be carrying an inactivated toxin. So if you want to prevent tetanus later on, you give injection tetanus toxoid, but somebody has suffered from road traffic accident, has a grossly contaminated wound, and it is highly likely that the Clostridium tetani spores may be present here. So you will go for tetanus immunoglobulin or TIG, again reinforcing the type of question that they may ask in the entrance, whether there is urgency or not. So I hope this thing is now absolutely clear. Similarly, the passive immunity can also be acquired naturally or artificially. So this can also be acquired naturally and artificially. Again in artificial passive immunization, you can easily understand, you give what are called as the preformed antibodies. So preformed antibodies can be given. This is very easy to understand. And if you look at the naturally acquired passive adaptive immunity, that would be from the mother to the fetus or the neonate or the infant, and this can happen either through placenta during the fetal life, and after the birth it can happen through lactation of what is called as the colostrums. So you know, colostrums carry IgA class of antibodies, and IgG class of antibodies can actually cross placenta. So immediately we know that this is active and passive immunity. It can be both of them can be naturally or artificially acquired. There is an interesting case of rabies. So even after the dog bite, the post exposure thing, we actually give active immunity, and we use the fact that the virus actually travels to the brain very, very slowly, and there is a considerable time available before the virus reaches the brain, and that is why you can actually give what is called as active immunity even after exposure to the dog bite, in cases if you want to prevent the rabies, which is a very, very fatal disease, very, very fatal disease. So I hope all these things are now absolutely clear about active and passive immunity. Now just to give you some brief idea about immunization. So you use what is called as vaccine. So we are looking at vaccination. Now there is a simple concept to remember here. We already know what is anamnestic response, why the secondary response is anamnestic. We already know that the adaptive immunity actually maintains the memory of the previous encounters of the antigen that it actually has faced. So every time an antigen enters into the body, the adaptive immunity makes a memory out of it, and therefore the secondary responses subsequently, when the antigen enters the body, the responses are higher in magnitude, and this is what is called as anamnestic response. So we can use this thing in vaccination as well. And in vaccination there can be a primary dose. Obviously this will be inducing the primary response, leading to the formation of few memory cells, and after an appropriate interval of time, the person can be given what are called as the booster doses. So this is a beautiful name. You can easily understand what booster means. So that means it boosts the immune response. Large number of memory cells are formed, and our idea is that the body must make large number of memory cells in the event that the person is exposed naturally to the antigen. It is not, or the pathogen which is carrying antigen, it is not going to cause disease normally in a healthy person. So there are some very, very important vaccines available, and now we know what is a primary dose and what are the booster doses. So this concept is important. Now, just to give you an elementary idea about the vaccines, so the vaccines can be one type of vaccine can be live attenuated vaccine. So they can be live attenuated vaccine. We are talking about some classical vaccine. They contain live pathogen. But the pathogen has a pathogenicity that has been reduced by certain chemical procedures. So what has happened is that there is a pathogen. In the pathogen, what is happening? The pathogenicity is decreased. That means somehow you modify the pathogen and decrease significantly its disease causing capability, but because it would be carrying the antigen, and this antigenicity is maintained, and this is what actually we want. So that means this type of vaccine, which is a live attenuated vaccine, will be carrying a live pathogen, and this pathogen has been attenuated. Now attenuated would mean that the pathogenicity has been significantly reduced but maintaining the antigenicity, and this is what is going to initiate the immune response, and this is how these vaccines are actually used. And if you want to know some important example, one is used to prevent tuberculosis. This is called as Bacillus calmette-guerin, and this actually is to prevent Mycobacterium tubercular infection or tuberculosis. Similarly, and another example would be oral polio vaccine. Oral polio vaccine is a live attenuated vaccine. And another example that comes to my mind right now is MMR, for preventing measles, mumps and rubella. So these are live attenuated vaccine. And another type of vaccine that may be possible is that it contains inactivated or killed pathogen. So it contains inactivated or killed pathogen. So this is inactivated or killed pathogen. You can easily see that this is the preventive vaccination. We are trying to induce active immunity in the person who receives the vaccine. So this is inactivated or killed pathogen. So immediately you can understand a pathogen that has been killed, say for example with formalin, say for example with heat. There are various methods by which the pathogen can be killed. So the pathogen is not able to cause now disease, but will be carrying the antigen that is present on its surface. So this type of vaccine would be called as an inactivated or killed vaccine. And an example would be, try to remember the counterpart of this vaccine, which is inactivated polio vaccine. So this is not oral, it is given intramuscular. So this vaccine is called as IPV, inactivated polio vaccine. So this is inactivated or killed pathogen. Similarly, there can be another type of vaccine. I told you that in certain cases it is not the pathogen or the antigen that is responsible for causing the problem. It is actually a toxin that is released by the pathogen that is causing the problem in the susceptible host. So what you can do is that to induce this active immunity, you can use a toxoid, an inactivated toxin. So that means it can contain an inactivated toxin. And now we know that tetanus, I have already told about tetanus. Please try to remember diphtheria. So there is a vaccine. So let me give you a slight homework here. There is a vaccine, diphtheria, pertussis and tetanus. So we know about diphtheria component, we know about tetanus component. Please find out that what is present with respect to pertussis. is it a killed bacterium? Pertussis is caused by bacillus pertussis, and it causes whooping cough. So this multivalent vaccine, please try to remember, you will have to search right now that what is present in this vaccine that is used to prevent pertussis. So I hope all these three things are now absolutely clear. There is another vaccine. So there is another vaccine which is actually called as a subunit vaccine. So this subunit vaccine means that you do not have the entire pathogen present, and you take a key component that will be presented as the antigen in the vaccine. So please try to understand, we are not taking the entire thing. We are taking a key component, a key component of the pathogen, and this is the key component of the pathogen that is presented as the antigen through vaccine, and that actually is used to evoke a response in the immune system from the host who is getting vaccinated. So this type of vaccine would be called as subunit vaccine. Frequently these type of vaccines can be created by recombinant DNA technology. So these are called as the second generation vaccines. The conventional vaccines are called as the first generation vaccine. The second generation vaccines are recombinant DNA vaccines, and they are very frequently having are subunit vaccines, or sometimes you will learn in higher classes what are called as conjugate vaccines. So that would be that we are not going to discuss conjugate vaccines. We are discussing a subunit vaccine because this is a very, very famous example where you can prevent a very, very contagious disease which is called as hepatitis B. And this virus, hepatitis B virus, is a double-stranded DNA virus, and the vaccine is made by recombinant DNA technology in recombinant yeast, and it is based on what is called as hepatitis B virus surface antigen, and it is also called as the Australia antigen. So this is very, very important vaccine. It is produced in recombinant yeast, highly effective vaccine given in 3 doses, and the doses are given intramuscularly. So these are the basic types of vaccines that are available. Obviously the third generation vaccines or the synthetic vaccines are also available. So on one hand I am saying the first generation vaccines, the conventional vaccines, then recombinant vaccines, second generation vaccine, and the synthetic vaccine. Otherwise, what vaccine contains? It may have a live attenuated pathogen, inactivated killed pathogen, it may have inactivated toxin, and it may actually carry some subunit. And if you are watching the news closely, think about the various coronavirus vaccines that are available and just try to understand, is there any vaccine that is based on a part of the pathogen rather than the complete pathogen, and does it make sense or not? So this is the thing that is given in your NCERT regarding active immunity, passive immunity, and the concept of immunization. This is where a simple question can actually be framed in your NEET entrance exam. Moving further, the next thing that your NCERT talks about is allergy. So the next topic that NCERT discusses is about allergy. So I would say that allergy is a hypersensitive response. It is a hypersensitivity response. So it is a hypersensitive response of the immune system. So that means the response is out of proportion. It is much more than that is needed. So this type of thing would be called as hypersensitivity. Everybody is sensitive to smoke, and they have actually some bronchoconstriction and cough. But when they are removed from the exposure to the smoke, immediately the physiology comes back to normal very rapidly. But somebody who may be having bronchial asthma may be hypersensitive and actually will have a higher degree of bronchoconstriction. So this is what we are saying, that this is a hypersensitive response of the immune system. And the question that is important here is that what type of antibody molecules are actually involved in allergic responses. The name is IgE class of antibodies. So IgE class of antibodies are involved in allergic responses. Now what can happen is that these IgE class of antibodies, once released, can activate basophils in the blood. So they can activate basophils. Now you please remember that basophils are the cells which are present in blood, and these basophils will release histamine. Now, most of the allergies, the mediator is actually histamine. So histamine, you know, is the mediator of inflammation as well. And we already know that this histamine is a very potent vasodilator. So something which is released in blood, this is very important. Please remember again, I am talking about in the rare event that IgE evokes a response from the basophils. The basophils release histamine. This is released in the blood. If something is present in the blood, it will travel throughout the body and there will be a generalized vasodilation, and this will be causing a precipitous fall in blood pressure. You can easily imagine. So when all the blood vessels are dilated, suddenly there is a significant fall in the blood pressure and the blood, and therefore oxygen will not be reaching the organs, and therefore the organs will be undergoing failure, and this is what is called as shock. So this is what is called as shock, and such generalized catastrophic response that occurs very rapidly is actually called as anaphylaxis, and it is a life-threatening emergency, and the immediate treatment would be to give a vasoconstrictor, and these people who are prone to develop anaphylaxis actually keep a shot of adrenaline with them. It's a very important, very rapidly acting vasoconstrictor and can be life-saving in such patients. I hope you have understood this. Now, some more commonly, what is going to happen, that this thing would have a localized response. So rather than generalized in blood, through blood, it may be a localized response, and this time the IgE will lead to release of histamine from mast cells. So you know that mast cells are present in the tissues, and again the thing is that there is histamine, and there will be localized type of reaction, and this would not be that severe with respect to anaphylaxis. For example, the hay fever, allergic rhinitis. So somebody exposed to allergen has continuous sneezing, and you can understand that the redness it develops, the nasal stuffiness, this is all because of vasodilation, etc. That would be allergic rhinitis or hay fever. So I am giving you an example of hay fever. The second would be urticaria. Urticaria is the rash on the skin. So somebody eats something that develops skin rashes, that would be urticaria. And the final thing would be one more example. Let me give you. This would be bronchial asthma. And if you look at bronchial asthma, there is inflammation, and you know that steroids are very potent anti-inflammatory agent, and therefore antihistaminics and steroids will be the mainstay for the treatment of allergies. I hope this concept is now absolutely clear regarding the section which is given on allergies in your NCERT. The next topic in the immune topic that is given in NCERT is about the autoimmune disorders. So let us talk about the autoimmune disorders. We are revising quickly all the important questions that may possibly be asked in your NEET entrance exam. So we are looking at autoimmune disorders. Now, as the name suggests, that the immune system actually starts responding to our own antigens. So that is a big problem. So these are some around 80 disorders in human beings are known, and they can be very severe and very difficult to treat. And in this system, remember the property of adaptive immunity, where I said that this adaptive immunity is characterized by the fact that it has the ability to distinguish between self and non-self. So it does not respond to its own antigen that are present on the cells of our own body. So our immune system does not actually work against them, and there is a sort of tolerance for them. And we already know that happens during processing. I told you. So that happens during processing. So if you remember, I was telling you about the primary lymphoid organ and secondary lymphoid organ, and I said that they were getting processed. That is the time where this property is acquired by the cells of the immune system, and they have an ability to distinguish between self and non-self. And if there is a problem with this immunity, if there is a problem with this ability, then they may start responding wrongly against the own antigen, and this will result in the formation of autoimmune conditions. Immediately you can understand they will be very difficult to treat. And so now we know that what actually are autoimmune disorder, And we know that certainly genetics also plays a role, the environment also plays a role. There are so many factors. We have not properly understood the pathogenesis of the autoimmune disorders, and it remains difficult actually to keep them under control for a very, very long period of time. But certainly a huge development in the medical field has resulted that this thing is now getting under control. If treated properly and timely manner, they can be managed, no doubt about it. But still there is a problem in autoimmune disorders. Now, if we talk about the common autoimmune disorders that are generally asked in the NEET entrance exam, as I told you, there are 80 of them, and please do not try to remember 80. You have an exam to qualify, which is NEET entrance. It is largely based on the concepts that are given in NCERT. So the thing that you must remember, actually number one would be rheumatoid arthritis. So rheumatoid arthritis. So this rheumatoid arthritis, the response is against the joint capsule and also the cartilages that are present in the joint, and it leads to the destruction of joint and can lead to deformity. So this is rheumatoid arthritis. Arthros means joint, itis means inflammation. There is inflammation of joint, the capsule is damaged, and the cartilages can be damaged, and it can be very, very painful condition, also associated with deformity. So this is one that you must remember. The second one would be myasthenia gravis. So these are the things that are actually commonly asked. So myasthenia gravis. So myasthenia gravis is an autoimmune condition where antibodies are formed against the acetylcholine receptors present on the neuromuscular junction, and obviously it will lead to muscular weakness. A very famous sign is a lid lag. So that means when the person opens the eye, the affected lid will open very late. So this is what is called as lid lag. So this is antibodies against the neuromuscular junction. Similarly, antibodies can be formed against myelin sheath, leading to neural problems, and the condition would be called as multiple sclerosis. Now please try to remember some other important conditions where I would say diabetes mellitus type 1. So this is insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. We have already discussed about this thing in endocrine system. The antibodies are formed against the beta cells of islets of Langerhans of pancreas. And number 5 would be what is called as a Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So even I am telling you some important diseases outside NCERT, but certainly I would request you not to remember all 80. So this is a case of hypothyroidism where antibodies are formed against the thyroid cells. Similarly, you have already read about this condition. So Graves' disease is also an autoimmune condition. In many cases, Addison's disease is also autoimmune condition. And if I go on telling you some other important conditions, one would be psoriasis. So one would be psoriasis. Psoriasis, there are some scaly regions that are very itchy, scaly lesions that are present on the skin. Sometimes they are red, sometimes they may become very scaly, and this is a very chronic skin condition which is called as psoriasis. So remembering skin, there is another, please try to remember this name, SLE. This is called as systemic lupus erythematosus. Systemic lupus erythematosus. So there is an inflammation of joint, there are pains in the joint, and there is a rash. So especially what is called as a malar flush, and there is a red butterfly like rash that is present on the skin. Again, it is involving multiple organs, but just I am giving you some idea. So this would be psoriasis, SLE. I remember one more, which is pernicious anemia. You know about pernicious anemia. The antibodies are formed against the parietal cells of the gastric mucosa, and if I remember one more, this would be the Crohn's disease, which is inflammatory bowel disease. So this is also This is also autoimmune condition. So I hope I have dealt with all the common conditions that can actually be asked in the entrance examination. Obviously there are so many others. Just if I am remembering one more, try to remember this is an important disease actually, which is called as celiac disease. So the people have sensitivity towards the protein that is present in the wheat, and and large part of gastrointestinal tract may actually be involved. So all these conditions are autoimmune disorders, and I have told you the basic thing, one or two things about all of them, and this should be sufficient. This should be sufficient in your NEET entrance examination. And finally the NCERT talks about the lymphoid tissue. So the lymphoid tissue of your body, and we have already discussed in video 1 that there are primary lymphoid organs and there are secondary lymphoid organs. So I'm not going to write it again. Just listen to this. I have told you bone marrow and thymus are the primary lymphoid organ. So do you remember this or not? All other organs will not be called as primary, they will be called as secondary lymphoid organs. And we have already talked about that the primary lymphoid organs provide the environment for the processing of the lymphocytes, and the interaction with the antigen actually occurs at the secondary lymphoid organs. These are the two important points that we have already discussed, and I hope you remember this. And now there is an important thing that is actually about spleen. So spleen is a very important lymphoid organ. It actually stores RBCs as well, and these RBCs can be life saving in the time of shock. I have already discussed what exactly is shock. There is a precipitous fall in blood pressure leading to multiple organ damage. Spleen can actually play a important role because it stores, as I said, RBC as well. You know about the filtration function of the spleen. So in addition to being a lymphoid organ, these are some very important functions that are actually performed by spleen. We know about lymph nodes. So we have talked about lymph nodes present in the lymphatic system in the cardiovascular physiology chapter, body fluids and circulation, where I have taught you about the lymph and the need of having lymph nodes, because with lymph the metastatic cancer cell can actually travel. Even the pathogens can travel and can reach every part of the body. So there is a need to be a policeman present here, a guard present, so that it filters out these pathogen and potentially malignant cell, and these are what are called as lymph node. And finally NCERT says that 50% of your actually lymphoid tissue or lymphatic tissue is mucosa associated lymphoid tissue. So this is mucosa associated lymphoid tissue. So we already know that what actually is a mucous membrane. So the inner surface, say for example gastrointestinal tract, you know about what is mucosa. So any lymphoid tissue that is present, that is associated with this mucosa. So it is not necessary that it is present in the mucosa. It is generally submucosal in location and generally present in mucosa and extends into the submucosa, but it is associated with the mucosa. And please try to understand, gastrointestinal tract is a one important portal for the possible entry of the pathogen. So pathogen can enter through the gastrointestinal mucosal ulcers, and therefore it is very important to have some lymphoid tissue present in the mucosa or in the submucosa or in the vicinity of the mucosa, as I am saying, so that they are able to take care of these pathogens which are trying to enter into the body through the gastrointestinal tract. So you can have, just to give you an idea, there can be nasal associated lymphoid tissue, there can be, say for example, bronchus associated lymphoid tissue, there can be, this is important, gastrointestinal associated lymphoid tissue. So large number of subclassification of MALT can be present. There are so many mucous membranes that are present in the body, and everywhere you will see the lymphoid tissue present generally as islands, aggregates in the form of islands. They are present in this part of the body. And try to remember when we say about gastrointestinal associated lymphoid tissue, try to remember the Peyer's patches. So Peyer's patches are the mucosa associated lymphoid tissue. They are occurring in patches, as I told you again. So these are the lymphoid aggregates that are present in the intestine. Normally they are present in distal jejunum and ileum. So distal jejunum and ileum, and obviously you can understand that they will be trying to protect against any pathogen that is going to enter into the body through these. Though not classically lymphoid tissue, there is an example, just a question that comes to my mind. Please try to remember that as well, that in the crypts of Lieberkühn in the small intestine, there can be present what are called as Paneth cells, and these Paneth cells actually secrete some proteins or peptides that are capable of taking care of certain amount of disease causing pathogens, and they are very, very important component, especially as I told you that they are present in the crypts of Lieberkühn. Occasionally they may be seen in cecum and appendix as well, but 50% of all lymphoid tissue in the body is actually mucosa associated lymphoid tissue. This is not at a one place, and this is scattered throughout, associated with the mucous membrane located at various locations in your body. So I hope you have understood the questions that can come from your immunity. Again, I will advise you to go through quickly your NCERT once. If needed, you can go for past year questions, you can go for understanding NCERT section from your master class in biology, and if you are very confident, you can go for mastering NCERT as well. But at least do the past year section and the understanding NCERT section from your master class master class in biology. So it is all becoming antibody master class in biology, and you will be good to go for your NEET entrance exam.